Hola, buenos días y buenas tardes. Es un gusto estar aquí con ustedes y presentarles al profesor Christoph Menke, quien es profesor emérito de filosofía práctica en la Universidad de Frankfurt, donde trabajó desde el 2009 hasta el 2025, luego de ocupar cátedras en the New School for Social Research en Nueva York y en la Universidad de Potsdam. El profesor, entre sus publicaciones, cuenta con La soberanía del arte, negatividad estética después de Adorno y Derrida, tragedia y lo ético, reflexiones sobre la igualdad, juego trágico, fuerza, un concepto fundamental de la antropología estética, derecho y violencia, la fuerza del arte, crítica de los derechos, autonomía y liberación, y teoría de la liberación. Sobre este libro, o sobre parte de este libro, nos va a presentar hoy su conferencia. La conferencia se titula Sí y no, la negatividad de la dialéctica. La conferencia va a ser en inglés, pero las preguntas pueden ser en inglés o en español. Así que, dicho esto, le doy la palabra al profesor Menke.
Yeah, thank you, Gianfranco. Sorry for speaking in English, so you can ask your questions in Spanish afterwards if you want to. But as Veronica knows, my Spanish is a little bit rusty, so it will take some time before it comes back. So I'm happy to be here to see so many people, some of whom I know, which is always very nice. So if as much of you could put on the camera, it would be nice for me because then I have something to see. I mean, not just the screen. I mean, the paper was distributed before, but I don't know if you had the chance to look at it or even to read it. So this is much too long to present in its entirety. So I will shorten it and at one point maybe simply have to cut off. So the question is, as the title says, what is the relation between a negativity and affirmation? Yeah, that is basically the question I'm interested in. And I think that is the question that is decisive for understanding of what freedom is. But I will not really explicitly or say much about freedom. It's as decisive for understanding what freedom is if you understand freedom not as a capacity, the capacity to choose, but if we think that freedom is about the being of the subject, how and the subject is, or what Badiou calls the procedure of this, which is the being of the subject. Yeah, so that is the question I want to understand. How is the subject and what is the relation between negativity or the connection between negativity and affirmation in the definition, in the constitution of the subject as a free being? And I take my starting point from a remark by Alain Badiou, which I found surprising, I must say, when I first came across it. And that is in his book on Badiou, on Saint Paul, which I find a really great book. But at some point he said something which I didn't understand. And basically it's the question, how can we understand it? Is it right? So the question is, he says there about Paul, that Paul in that process or procedure that makes him into a subject eradicates negativity. Yeah, so, and I wonder what that means. So what Badiou means by is why. So that would mean the procedure of the subject is the procedure not of negativity, but rather on to the opposite of eradicating negativity. And I want to understand what Badiou means by this and how he justifies this. And the justification that he develops for that, I think, surprising claim is his critique of Hegelian dialectic. Yeah. So, and therefore, in the first part of my paper, I will reconstruct what I take to be the decisive point of Hegel's dialectical integration of negativity or negation and affirmation in his concept of determination as self-determination. That will be my first step. And in the second step, then I will take up my question concerning Badiou, but I will do this in a conversation with the third position, which is Adorno's. Yeah, because Adorno also criticizes Hegel for the way in which he integrates negation and affirmation in his concept of determination as self-determination, but he does it, as you very well know, obviously totally different, entirely different, namely by defending a certain idea of negativity. So we have two criticisms of Hegel, Badiou, and Adorno, and the difference between, I mean, their criticism is centered around the question of how to think negativity. So let me begin with Hegel. So I think the basic move in Hegel is in his conception of freedom is to say is a criticism of the concept of freedom, of the understanding of freedom as choice. And the criticism holds or says that in the concept of choice, the relation between negation and affirmation stays, or negation and determination stays an external one. Yeah, in choice, I first negate a pre-given determinacy. I negate being defined, determined in a specific way. And after that act of negation, I choose a certain determination. But determination and negation are merely externally related. Yeah? So first negation is over, then I can freely choose a determination. And the way in which the determination which I choose is understood is not internally defined by emerging from an act of negation. And this is something that this is an abstractness, an externality in the understanding in the relation between negation and determination that Hegel criticizes. I'm thinking now of the introduction to the philosophy of right. And here his own positive alternative account starts, because he says in order to understand the inner connectedness between negation and determination, we need to rethink what determination as such is. So for those who have the paper, I'm now on page 5. And I will start to read now the first step of my argument. So in freedom of choice, as I just said, that is his criticism. He says that is a vocabulary, a terminology he uses, not really in a technical sense, not really an elaborate sense, but often when it comes to that question. In freedom of choice, determination is just understood as determinacy, yeah, not as determination. Yeah, you already see the difference here. Determinacy is a state of being determined, of something being determined. Determination is an act, is a process of rendering a determination, of bringing about a determination. And Hegel's whole point is to say that any true determination understood in the right way is a break with determinacy. So determination as such, if we understand it correctly, has to be understood as a process of bringing about a determination that is grounded in a prior, or is grounded in the negation of determinacy. So we have negation of we have determinacy, negation of determinacy, and the expression of the negation of determinacy in understanding determination, or in providing in bringing about determination as a process. And the logical relation that he is interesting here is to say about the process of determination, that this process, determination understood as a process. Yeah, this is the point. Not, Yeah, so the process of determination is not external to determination, but determination is a process and is the process of a self or a subject that in the process of determination, as he says, remains with itself, bei sich selbst. This is this famous Hegelian formula. And in this determination, he says, it joins together with itself alone. Yeah? So the subject as the instance of negativity brings about a determination in such a way that it is present in the determination itself. Yeah? The determination does not become independent or separate, autonomous, selbstständig over against the process of subject of determination by the subject. Okay, so that is the basic move in Hegel. So replacing the concept of determinacy by the concept of determination in the logical structure I just said. So the point then is positive freedom in Hegel is the unity of negation and determination. And as such, positive freedom is nothing other than the dialectical truth of determination in general. So that is the claim here. Every determination in its truth, if we understand it correctly, is self-determination. Yeah, so determination that is not yet self-determination or this determination by a self is mere determinacy and in that sense deficient. This is the lesson, I think, of Hegel's theory of this famous theory of bestimmte Negation, of determinate negation, which states that determination, as you know, is the negation of negation. On the first level, this concept of determinate negation serves to describe the way the operation of negation proceeds in practice. In this process, the negated, as he says, does not resolve itself into a nullity, into abstract nothingness, but essentially only into the negation of its particular content. Or that such a negation is not just negation, but is the negation of the determinate fact. One could say the negation of determinacy. Yeah, so every negation is a negation of a pre-given determination, which is determinacy. And therefore determinate negation, unquote. Since negation is always the negation of something determined, so there is no other negation, Hegel says, it does not stand in an external opposition to what it negates. Negation rather is the nothingness of that from which it results, he says. The negation of the determination is thus the immanent movement, since negation itself is a result of the determination that it negates. Negation itself has a result. Quote again, looked at a result, what emerges from the process is the determinate negative, which is consequently a positive content as well. So in that sense, every negation, since this negation of determinacy results into a determination. Yeah, there is no negation without a result. Argument for that, the claim, because it is directed against determinacy. Yeah, because it stems out of determinacy, it will result in determination. But this is only, I think, a superficial understanding of what is going on here in the concept of determinate negation, because we still are looking at, let's say, the logical relation in a everyday sense of logical between one determination and the other. The decisive point here is that in Hegel's understanding, I think the concept of the conception of determinate negation has an ontological point. And by this, I merely mean the whole claim, the whole theory of that conception is to tell us something about how determination is. Yeah, this I mean by ontological. So the theory of determinate negation is to teach us how determinations in true exist, what their mode of being is. Yeah, so not what is a determination, but how is a determination. This I mean by ontological. Or one could say it applies to the form of determination. And the ontological meaning of determinate negation in that sense lies in the, I think, entirely fundamental concept, fundamental for Hegel's thought philosophy, the concept of a result. Yeah, that is the term he uses in the phenomenology of spirit, where he explains the concept of determinate negation. Determinate negation makes determination into a result, he says. So negation is an act directed at the first determination, which then produces a second determination as a result. And that means the second determination, insofar as it is a result, contains in itself the first determination and its negation. Yeah, so as a result, it contains the process that has resulted in it. In the result, he says, there's therefore contained in essence that from which the result derives, a tautology indeed, since the result would otherwise be something immediate and not a result. Yeah? So the opposition is there, immediately existing determinacy, resulting determination. Being a result, the second determination, Hegel also says, is richer than the first. Yeah, so that is the distinction between a determination as a result and an initial determinacy. Richer, because it negates or opposes the preceding and therefore contains it, and it contains even more than that, for it is the unity of itself and its opposite. That means the second determination, the result, is not richer than the first one in content. It's not more stuff in the determination. It's not more elements there, but it's richer in its form. Because it's richer, because precisely because it's come second. Yeah, so it's also an apologia of the secondness, and therefore it has a history. Yeah, to be a determination in the true sense means to be a result and means to be historical. It has the history of being a result of a negation of a previous determination. Precisely because it has a history and therefore a past, the second determination is, as Hegel here also says, structurally new. Yeah, so it's also a theory of novelty, a theory of the result, a theory of innovation, of novelty, of historical transformation and novelty. Hegel again, but when the result is conceived as it is in truth, namely as a determinate negation, a new form has thereby immediately arisen, and in the negation, the transition is made. Yeah, so you see what's all implied in that theory of determination. The theory of determination is a theory of result, of history, of innovation, of historical transition. Yeah, that is all entailed, that is implicit, that is the point, one could say, of the theory of determinate negation. Every determination that is understood to be a result of a negation that is of its history is thereby a new determination. To understand determination, that is to say determination as such, this way is what Hegel says constitutes the truly dialectical factor. Yeah, okay, so I hope you see the point. So I wanted to indicate that the whole question of the relation between negativity and affirmation is about how there is determination, how there are determinations. And the decisive point is to come up with a theory of determination as constituted by negation, yeah, not externally brought about, not facilitated, not enabled, but by constituted by negation, and therefore entailing, embodying negation in itself, and in that sense being historical. So even a natural determination of a natural event, is historical in that sense that it is a new determination that has been brought as a result of thinking. Yeah. Okay, so I try to make this point in Hegel as strong as I can. Maybe you can make it stronger, but in order now to see what the shortcomings are. Yeah, so and the shortcomings are addressed here by or articulated by Badiou and by Adorno. And I think they agree on one point, which Badiou makes in his commentary on maybe the first really dialectical move. Okay, maybe it's not the first, but I think it's the first dialectical move of the science of logic, where Hegel introduced the concept of etwas, of something. Yeah, Badiou makes this point in a very, one could even say, naive way, without really making much of an argument of it, not really provide an argument. And I don't even know what the argument exactly is, but I think I found it entirely compelling. And in a certain sense, the point is that if we understand determination in such a dialectical way, in such a historical way, we miss something which maybe in an everyday understanding of the term phenomenologically is constitutive for determination, which Badiou calls the externality. Yeah, so we have dissolved the pre-givenness of determination as determinacy in the process of negation and its mediation and so on. But in that process, Badiou wants to say, we have somehow lost what seems to be crucial for understanding of determination, namely that a determination, a Bestimmung in German, is a quality that exists independent of me, externally, prior to me, out there. Yeah, so that is what Badiou indicates. So there is always a moment of externality in the determination that resists, he seems to want to say, this dialectical processualization, yeah. And this, I think, is what he means by affirmation. Yeah, so affirming a determination means to affirm it in its pre-givenness to me, in its externality, in its irreducibility to processes of mediation, to processes of subjectively bringing it about. And I start now with, in a sense, I simply want to start with this objection in the second part of my paper by saying I find that a good point to, and to think about what the consequences for what the criticisms from that observation would be of the Hegelian conception. And I think that Adorno basically shares that move. Yeah. So for those of you who know negative dialectics, I think many formulations will come up at the point when he speaks of the Vorrang des Objekts, yeah, the preponderance of, or the priority of the object, for instance. Yeah, this is a similar move. Yeah, or in a more technical sense, there's a critique of phenomenology, Husserlian phenomenology, in Adorno, especially in the meditations on metaphysics in the last chapter of negative dialectics, where it tries to say we have to resist the reduction, the phenomenological reduction of objectivity, of externality, to a mere phenomenon that is subjectively constituted. Yeah, we have to reject the reduction of objectivity to subjective constitution. And the term he uses for that, and let's say the operation that we have to perform as subjects in order to do justice to that moment of Vorrang des Objekts, to the moment of irreducibility of objectivity to subjectivity, is what he calls Rettung, rescue. Yeah, we have to rescue the irreducible moment of priority over against the subject. Yeah, and here now at that point, at the same time, you notice that I'm trying to hasten up a little bit because okay, now let me first say that this is the point I think where I see a deep agreement between Adorno and Badiou, in order then to say something about the disagreement, and then I will stop. The deep agreement in their criticisms in their respective criticisms of Hegel. So they both think that the dialectical unity of negativity and determination, one could also say of subjectivity and objectivity, that Hegel, I think, in a very compelling way develops in his theory of determinate negation and in many other places, misses that moment of externality, priority, and I mean, a more demanding in a way in a more maybe a more fundamental or far-reaching, conceptually far-reaching way of putting is that they then, of course, ask the question what the relation of the subject to this external pre-givenness of the object is, yeah, der Vorrang des Objekts. And I think both think that this demands from the subject to enter a relation of infinite difference, yeah, an infinitization of the subject. So to being related to something that will forever, in that sense, infinitely, forever escape the possibility, forever exceed the possibility of the subject's capacities to grasp it adequately. Yeah, so there's an infinite moment of difference between the subject and the object, they claim, against the Hegelian reconciliation of these two moments. Okay, so I didn't give any quotes here at this point, so because there's no time, I'm already talking too long. So let me now at the end say something about the difference that comes up here between Badiou and Adorno. If I'm right in claiming that till that point they have developed a parallel form, a similar form of objecting against Hegel's project. Here comes the question now of negativity back. So Badiou's claim is that in order to do justice I mean, his term is fidelity, yeah, to practice fidelity, as he says, towards this event character of this externality of the event, we have to think the subject, as I said, in such a way that in our thinking of the subject, we eradicate the negativity of the subject. Yeah, because Badiou accepts Hegel's point that if we grant the subject, or we define the subject by the concept of negativity, we will thereby have turned the determination into the result of the enactment of that negativity by the subject. Yeah, so that is, he says, but you basically grants Hegel that to think the negativity of the subject implies already the whole dialectical apparatus of turning the determination into a mere result. Adorno at that point, as you know, goes the opposite way. Yeah? He says that infinite opening up of the subject towards the externality, the pregivenness of the non-identical quality of the object can only go through the most radical performance, in a certain sense, of negativity by the subject. Yeah? So the subject has to make that possible, that opening up to the non-identical by acts of radical negation. So in the concept of introducing or defining the concept of rescue, let me just read that quote because I think it's a very dramatic way of making the point I just wanted to indicate. He says, Adorno says at the end of Negative Dialectic, nothing can be saved unchanged, nothing that has not passed through the portal of its death. Yeah, so in order to gain the object, gaining the externality of the right way, it has to pass, as he says, through the portal of its death. Yeah, very Christological formulation, obviously. Yeah. If rescue is the inmost impulse of any human's spirit, there is no hope but unreserved surrender of that which is to be rescued, as well as of the hopeful spirit. So the subject has to surrender itself, but also the object in its given form has to be surrendered in order for both of them, in a certain sense, to re-emerge in a transformed way out of that portal of that condition of death. I mean, this is obviously a very direct reference to zum spirituellen Karfreitag, so this reference to death, to Christ's death in Hegel. And last point now. So if that is the difference between Adorno and Badiou, so that the passing through infinite negativity is the condition of possibility for the subject opening up in that infinite way, and therefore we cannot eradicate negativity in order to regain truth, yeah, against Hegel. The question, I think, is okay, what is the argument? Yeah, so why go in Adorno's direction and not Badiou? I would say we should go in Adorno's direction. So what is the point? And I think this is how the paper ends. And I noticed rereading it yesterday that I think I didn't really elaborate that point here, but maybe I didn't see when I wrote the paper how fundamental this is. I think it has basically to do with the concept of second nature in Adorno. Yeah. Can I take 2 or 3 minutes, Gianfranco, to explain this for a moment? Okay. I mean, Badiou in being at event makes that very traditional, I think much more traditional than he maybe knows himself, distinction between situations of nature and of history. Yeah. So, and basically wants to say, or not basically wants to say, basically he's saying that something like the event, by which he means the event of truth, in which the externality of the object prior to the subject reveals itself, this is constitutive for historical situations, or this makes the situation historical. Yeah. So, and at the same time, he wants to say, yeah, but the question whether we are in a natural situation, if we think capitalism is natural, or whether we think we are in a historical situation, this is not something that the situation decides by itself. Obviously not. It's not a self-identifying distinction between nature and history. So how do I know if I'm in a natural situation or a historical situation? So, but this is something that depends on the intervention of the subject. Yeah? So to say, I'm in a historical situation, for instance, to say capitalism is not natural but historical, that is an act that creates, in a certain sense, by the intervention of the subject, the historicity of the situation. It's not these. So the distinction of is, in a sense, a way, this point that also Brandon makes very different. The distinction between nature and history is a self-historical distinction. Nature itself does not make the distinction. We make the distinction. And this is a subjective act, or as already said, Badiou calls it an act of subjective intervention. And now the question, and Adorno would still, I think, be with Badiou at that point, because intervention, Eingriff, is also a basic category in Adorno, as you know. Now the question is, what is the nature of such an intervention? What is the power of the subject to make an intervention by which the historicity of a situation is disclosed, and therefore the possibility of the appearance of the event is opened up? I think here Badiou basically says it's something like an acte gratuit, something like he even says is a decision. The subject has to make a decision. I think Adorno says something else here. Adorno says this is an act of critique. And I think that is not the same. The act, the interventive act of the subject by which the historicity of the situation and so on is opened up and disclosed, is grounded in Adorno in the dissolution of the second nature illusion. Therefore, a critique that is, in a certain sense, the normal state of being of our life. So we always find ourselves in situations of second nature, and it needs a negative, it needs an act of negativity to disrupt, in a certain sense, this veil of second nature, and thereby reaching the situation where we even can start to decide or even ask the question of decision that for Badiou is fundamental for the subjective intervention that creates the nature-history split. So the basic point is, prior to the nature-history split is the nature-history confusion. So in second nature, or one could also say prior to that act of decision, which in a certain sense is the revolutionary act, is the situation where by society, and society is a category of second nature, the distinction between nature and history is split, is confused, is dissolved, seems to be made inexistent. And therefore, if that is the situation in which we start, we don't start in a situation of either nature and history, but we start in a situation in which the nature-history split is precisely confused, like in myth, for instance, like in bourgeois society. We need, as a first step, an act of critique, of the negative act of disidentifying, dissolving the confusion between nature and history, and therefore disrupting second nature. I mean, one could also put this in a polemical sense. I think the basic distinction between Adorno and Badiou is that Adorno has stayed a critical theorist of society, while Badiou at some point has given that project up. Okay, thank you. That was a little bit too long, but yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Christoph, for this wonderful talk. And now we have time for a couple of questions. You can formulate the questions either in English or in Spanish.
Or in German.
Or in German, of course.
So also tell me, I mean, as I said, I rushed a little bit through the text. So if I mean, I'm sure there's certain steps were not entirely clear. So let me know if I can be of help in explaining it a bit further.
Okay, Gino?
Yeah, thanks for the talk. I was wondering, yeah, more so than a question, trying to um, let's say get into well, whatever. What I'm trying to say is I still have some lingering things about the things you just said that I am not understanding fully yet. So I was maybe wondering if you could go over again this idea that both Badiou and Adorno criticize of the dialectics of Hegel, understanding them as kind of like, I guess, this dialectics of reconciliation in which subject and object kind of find a unity. And my question, I guess, would be what still is not clear for me is how is it that both Adorno and Badiou oppose to this idea that of unity, right? Like, why is it that there is kind of like this lingering, never completely solved externality to objects that then make it so the dialectics are not this process of completely finding unity or whatever. So if you could go over that, that would help me a
Yeah.
bit.
No, I think that is the crucial question. Um, and that was, I assume, as I said, and I mean, you noticed this obviously also very clearly, that this is the point where where I said that I really don't know what. I mean, is this the counter argument in Badiou and Hegel, Adorno against Hegel, or let's say at first only in counter intuition? Yeah. So, um, and I think they see very well. I mean the power of the Hegelian argument by which he overcomes, in a certain sense, the Kantian impasse. Yeah. So I mean, or by which he tries to fulfill the Kantian project. I mean, to explain subjectivity, objectivity by subjectivity, without simply reducing the object to the subject. Yeah? So that is the project. And I think the way in which I tried to present the concept of determinate negation, I wanted to say that this is about solving that problem. Yeah, so of the Kantian dualism, one could say. Yeah, so by saying, by processualizing the mode of existence of a determination, by asking about how determinations exist, and then Hegel says, okay, how do they exist? They exist as results, yeah, of processes of us determining something as something. Yeah. And then you ask about the logic of this process of determining something. And it turns out that this is a process of negating another, the immediate givenness of something against the immediate givenness of something. We start a process of experience, as he says, the phenomenological spirit, or later he would rather say the process of thinking. And in experiencing and thinking, we transform the way in which something is determined, namely as seemingly immediate, into something that results from our experience. Yeah, so that is the idea, and I think they both share, in a certain sense, that anti-dualistic logic here, or a point. But they both want to say, and this is the point for which we were asking, that that process of mediation goes one step too far. Yeah, so that is the point where Adorno, for instance, I mean, let me stick with Adorno for the moment, because I'm much more familiar with Adorno. I found it not easy to talk about Badiou, to say the least. Yeah, so I mean, it's for me a very complicated author, not only because I have no idea of mathematics, but I mean, the philosophies, he writes differently, so farther away from my tradition and upbringing. But Adorno's point here, I mean, the systematic point here is, he says we have to reconstruct and mistrust Hegel's concept of the moment. Yeah, so I mean, this is the basic move of Hegel. So everything that seems to be immediately given, immediately there, being what it is as by itself, will be shown to be a moment of a mediation. Yeah. So Sellars in his book at one point says, therefore Hegel is the great foe of immediacy. Yeah, he wants to overcome immediacy by showing the prehistory of thinking by which that which seems immediately is in truth a moment of and thereby mediated. And I think Adorno says where he discusses that problem in negative dialectics is to say that the danger of that operation is to lose the external or the truth of immediacy, to say it simply. Yeah, that is a danger of an idealistic transformation of the immediate into mediation. We rather have to think the dialectic between mediation and immediacy. And what rescue means is, or let's say we have to see that immediacy comes in two forms. Immediacy comes in the wrong form of pre-given determinacy, yeah, second nature, and it has to be rescued from its wrong form of second nature and from mediation at the same time. So what rescue means is the recuperation of immediacy by going through mediation against mediation. Yeah, this is the Adorno idea. But I grant you that I don't know what is there a strong conceptual argument for that, or is this a counter project? Yeah. So, but this is the project I'm interested in. This makes a little bit clearer? I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, still, I guess I do wonder where this stems from, right? But and also how much is it actually opposed to Hegel? Because at least from what I get from Hegel, dialectics is never like a finished process, right? There is always this kind of like infinity that stems from dialectics that then always makes the process need to negate that itself again and then go on to another mediation that gets to another process and so on, right? So I do wonder how much of what Adorno says is actually opposed to Hegel or how much is just being Hegelian at the same time.
Right. No, that's very true. I mean, I think that I just want to say one can easily, but that is certainly not right. But one can trace, one can find in Hegel a move which goes against this this in a certain simplified version of transformation, everything immediately given into the result of subjective acts or collective acts of determination. Yeah, so this is what I wanted to say. They're both criticized. Yeah, so where one could read Hegel as somebody who is himself interested in rescuing immediacy through dialectical mediation. Yeah, I think there are traces of that. And these are, I mean, just terminologically, comes often up or is sometimes, maybe not often, but at crucial points in his work, this is when he speaks about moments becoming extreme. Yeah, so extreme is extreme is the German word. So when he wants to say, so the true dialectical thinking of mediation in Hegel would be to include two opposite, in a certain sense, movements, right? Integrating everything as a moment in overarching and over integrating totality and setting the moment free as an extreme. Yeah. And I think extreme in every sense is an extremism, one could say, of the existence of the particular or the singular, as not simply be integratable in totality. I think one can find that move in Hegel. So maybe Hegel is a critic of himself at that point.
Thank you. Joaquín, you're next on my list, and then Daria.
Bueno, voy a hacer mi pregunta en español. Me es más fácil.
Veo despacio.
Ya. Sí, mi pregunta era con respecto a esta cita que hiciste de Adorno, ¿no? Porque I can try to make it in English. So you said
No,
that.
for me it's okay.
Ok, ya, entonces dijiste que el sujeto tiene que rendirse ante la exterioridad del objeto, y eso, digamos, por lo que entiendo de Adorno me queda claro. Nosotros no podemos intentar, digamos, captar conceptualmente la totalidad del objeto, digamos, tenemos que dejar ir el pensamiento, pero después mencionaste que el objeto tiene que rendirse también para poder resurgir de la muerte. Y esa parte, digamos, me gustaría que la expandas porque no me queda tan claro de qué manera se da, digamos, ¿no? Porque en el sujeto, su rendición entiendo que es el abandonamiento, el dejar de lado el pensamiento idéntico, o sea, pero en el objeto, cómo se rinde? ¿No? Esa es mi pregunta. No sé si tiene sentido, si queda claro.
Sí, sí, es muy claro. La respuesta más, no, maybe it's too early to try to speak Spanish. So maybe next year, so when I come, it will come back. So I think the answer is in a sense very simple, because the presupposition is that in the beginning things are false. Yeah, the way in which they are by themselves, in which they present themselves in a false way. Yeah, so the subject in the beginning of the dialectical process is a subject that tries to constitute by its own capacities the object. That is what a subject is. Yeah. So this is our second nature as subjects. Yeah. So this is how we are constituted as subjects in our society, at least. And the object in the beginning also has a second nature mode of being, namely it presents itself as defined by certain determinations. So the object as it simply is not the truth about the object. It's not the true form of the object. So the subject has to transform itself as much as the object has to transform itself, both, yeah, together in a certain sense. That is the point. I mean, that is the materialist point here, only together. Yeah? The subject can only change in relation to an object. It cannot change independently of engaging with objects in a different way. But the object, and even one could say nature as such for Adorno, is also to be rescued from its own second natureness. Yeah, so the first nature is never first nature. The first nature is always petrified into a certain state of being defined by qualities and so on and so on. And it has equally to be saved, as he says, gerettet from its own identificatory appearance or existence. Yeah. So in that sense, I think that is the very fundamental starting point with it. The paper basically ends. So that I think in Adorno, everything, Adorno's thinking here is shaped by the thought that the starting point of thinking is always a condition, the fallen condition, one could say, the wrong condition. Yeah, we always start with in the wrong condition of the existent society. And this wrongness or this falsity, wrongness maybe is the better word, does not only affect the subject, but all of its objects as well. So things are wrong for Adorno. Yeah, the way in which things are is wrong, because they are not things, but they are objects which are defined by their determinations and so on and so on. Yeah, so they have to be rescued by being negated, by their wrongness being disrupted, and the subject at the same time, and in mutual aid, one could say, mutual interaction. This is how I understand that quote. Yeah, does this? Okay.
Thank you. Daria, please.
Hola, sí, yo tenía una pregunta sobre justo la primera pregunta con la que empezaste, la de ¿qué es la libertad? Y claro, lo que me estaba preguntando era, entonces, a partir de todo esto, ¿cómo respondería Adorno a esa pregunta? ¿No? ¿Sería la libertad esta capacidad de crítica? ¿No? Y también te quería preguntar si tiene algo que ver, bueno, supongo que sí. No, o sea, si podrías explicar un poco más esto que en el texto Adorno dice que el sujeto no debe autodeterminarse, sino sobrepasarse, o podrías, o sea, más allá de sí mismo. ¿Podrías explicar esto?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the direction in which this is going. I mean, so that is also, I mean, the paper somehow forgets that topic. So because when it comes to the conversation, not a conversation, but comes to the complicated relation between Badiou and Adorno, the topic of freedom drops out because, as far as I know, Badiou never talks about freedom. Yeah, I think he thinks that this is not a fundamental category. I think, yeah. So, I mean, it's so surprising if you read, for instance, that little book on St. Paul, that in many also religious or theological readings, the event of, the encountering of the event, the revelation, is often described as an act of liberation. Yeah, so Paul is liberated from its wrong existence, and he enters now a sphere of truth, and so on and so on. But you simply does not talk like that. Yeah, so that is, I mean, this is not a good argument, but it's just, I mean, to explain why I don't talk about freedom anymore at that point. Yeah, because I think Badiou does not really do that, or is not interested in that concept. Basically, because I think he thinks that freedom has become to mean freedom of choice, and freedom of choice is part of our problem. Yeah? Freedom of choice is constitutive for capitalist economy, and so on and so on. Yeah, so we have to overcome freedom as choice. Yeah? But the direction in which I would, I mean, with Adorno, maybe then try to reformulate that concept of freedom in a different way is exactly on this line that you have indicated. So the freedom of the subject would then consist for Adorno in the process, but you would say procedure, of the subject breaking through the wrong identity of itself and of the object as pre-given in second nature. Yeah, so in that sense would be a negative operation of opening up to the not identical, as Adorno says. And I think Adorno's point here is why we need the concept of freedom in order to think that is very, in a way, very simple, but very important. This has to do with what we just discussed before, I think with Joaquin. So because it's not just that the subject has to give itself up or surrender, as Adorno sometimes also says, to the experience of the other. Yeah. So then, because that would mean this is a merely this metaphor of surrendering seems to miss in what sense this surrender is precisely an activity of the subject. Yeah, the subject has to do something actively in order to overcome its false self-understanding of being constitutive for objectivity. So it's an activity of surrendering. Yeah, and that activity of surrendering, that is the moment of freedom. Yeah, so strangely or seemingly paradoxically, without the participation of the subject, that overcoming of the subject cannot take place. Yeah, it's the subject, him or her or itself, that has to do the overcoming. And that paradoxical doing, let's say, operating, working against itself, that is the moment or the capacity or the being of freedom, I think, for Adorno. Yeah, so you see the point? So it's not just the opening up, but it's the activity of the subject against its own second nature reduction of the object to the subject. It's a self-critical operation.
Thank you. Verónica, it's your turn.
Buenas tardes, buenos días. Hola,
Hola.
Christoph, hola a todos. Voy a preguntar en español. Lamentablemente no la volví a leer a la ponencia, la leí hace mucho y no la volví a leer porque no me llegó o no la vi en el correo. Y bueno, y siempre me pareció como un texto bastante complicado. Tengo como dos preguntas que se tocan mucho con lo que se estuvo discutiendo y quizás, bueno, en ese sentido son un poco superfluas, pero la primera tiene que ver directamente con la pregunta anterior, en el sentido que tengo la impresión de que el concepto que tomas de Hegel, de negación determinada, por lo menos en la fenomenología parece como un concepto retrospectivo, ¿no? Y pareciera que vos lo que estás discutiendo acá es ese concepto, pero en vistas a una posible transformación, ¿no? Cómo pensar el concepto o cómo criticarlo o cómo salirse de él en vistas a una posible crítica y transformación del capitalismo, por decirlo más simplemente. Y en ese contexto me preguntaba cuál es la diferencia o cuál es la transformación que se da en las dos posturas, ¿no? En la de Adorno y Badiou, o la que vos querrías seguir y la de Badiou. O sea, ¿qué diferencia tendría como para poder, en el marco de intentar pensar algún tipo de crítica o de transformación de la existencia? Esa sería la primera. ¿Cómo pensar la praxis, digamos, en los dos casos? Y la segunda pregunta iba orientada al concepto de crítica que vos identificaste con la negación, o sea, utilizando crítica en este sentido etimológico de diferenciar en relación a Hegel. Y quería preguntarte cómo se ligaría a partir de, digamos, con ese concepto de crítica al momento afirmativo, ¿no? Podríamos pensarlo como una especie de autorreflexión de la propia crítica. ¿Cómo aparecería, digamos, el momento afirmativo a partir de esa identificación de lo negativo con la distinción en la crítica, etimológicamente hablando? Esas dos cosas.
Yeah, thank you, Veronica. It's extremely complicated, especially the second question. I think the way in which I try to present this idea of determinate negation in a sense, it's to indicate two elements there. Strictly correlative elements, which I think are the reason for Adorno to still think that what he is doing is negative dialectics. Yeah, well, it's still dialectics. Yeah, so and this is what is relevant here. So and Hegel, I quoted this, says that the explanation of determinate negation is all about explaining what dialectical really means. And these two elements are, first of all, the idea, the rejection of determination as pre-given, as the wrong immediacy. Yeah? So the determination as determinacy, he says here, Bestimmtheit, as if the determination of the object were somehow sitting in the object. Yeah? The object determines it somehow itself, yeah? Or is always already determined, and I then, what I have to do is to mirror that determination in my mind or something like that. Yeah. So determine the strict rejection of the wrong naturalization of determination as the determination were something that existed by itself immediately out there. So that is the negative side. I think that Adorno entirely subscribes to in Hegel. And the positive side is to say that that means that from now on, if the negative work is successfully done on that wrong form of immediacy, then the determination becomes, in a sense, historical, and this very, I mean, affirmative concept of the new in Hegel. Yeah, so innovate. I mean, so he says it's a new form. Yeah, and so dialectics is in that sense about thinking the possibility of the new. Yeah, I think that is very fundamental. Yeah, and in Adorno's in Hegel's approach, so the new is not something that occasionally comes up in history, but if we understand thinking or experiencing in the right way, then for us as truly experienced subject, everything is new. Yeah, so we are always astonished in a sense that we are always, I mean, if we, in a sense, it's a very radical thesis, I think, in also Hegel, if we just recognize something as being as it always was, yeah, we are not thinking. Yeah, so that form of recognition is not thinking, is not experience. So I think this radical idea in the new, where the new is not like the new iPhone or so, it's not an innovation in that sense, but it's the mode of existence of an object. Yeah, so I'm only truly engaging with something if that something thereby appears me as new, for me as new. Yeah, so I think these two theoretical motives which define the concept of determinate negation in my reading. This is something that Adorno inherits, takes over from Hegel, says, yes, yeah, these are the two moments. So the beginning, the critique of wrong immediacy, the end, being able to think the new. That is what it takes over. And I just say this because I'm not entirely sure if I would agree with your claim that determinate negation is retrospective. Yeah, it's rather, yeah, because if determinate negation is about the transformation of the somehow seemingly timelessly pre-givenness of determinacy into a new determination, yeah, we always already in the middle of a process, yeah, so of change, he also says of transition, yeah, so that is the most revolutionary that Hegel can get, yeah, so we are always in the process of revolutionizing and producing the new, yeah. I know that this is a little bit excessive reading, but I think it could defend it. Yeah, I would try to defend it as far as possible. The other question, I don't know if this answers your question. You can maybe get back to me if I missed your point. The other point about critical affirmation, I think that is extremely complicated because I think you're right. I mean, the way in which I presented it was the argument at the end that where I think you were referring to that. So where I try to say what is the difference between Badiou and Adorno, right? And where I said Badiou would say decision. Yeah, I decide to see this as a historical situation, and therefore I am open to the event. And Adorno saying here, no, not decision, but critique. Yeah, that was the way in which I very schematically tried to oppose them or to distinguish them. And then you asked rightly and convincingly, but what is critique? Yeah, so is critique something I do? Yeah, so is this a self-conscious operation that I can decide, in a sense, again, decide to perform with on my own, which I have the power and the capacity to simply perform. And I think if we describe it like this, we see that this is more, in Adorno at least, I mean, more complex, because critique can only start in Adorno with an experience of affirmation. Yeah, so that is a certain kind of complex circularity. On the one hand, the critique is the condition of possibility in order to opening myself up to an experience of the affirmative existence of the thing over against its identified appearance. But Adorno always, I mean, time and again says, critique would not even start without an impulse coming from the object, in which the object starts to disclose itself to me as being different from what I thought it is. Yeah, so there is a moment of, I don't know if you refer to that, but an impulse, a potential, a mimetic impulse, one could say. So where the whole process of critique does not even get to start, yeah, without I having a glimpse, or me having a glimpse of the object as being different, yeah, or an intuition, or something like this, a remembrance, yeah. So something immediate, yeah, operating in me that rejects the false immediacy of the object as it is given as a commodity or in capitalist, I don't know what, yeah. So critique in itself already, I mean, so I think I take what you said to imply that we cannot really think this as a sequentiality. I said, first, let's do the labor of critique, then the object will show itself as being different. I think that is not how it works, yeah? And this is not how Adorno thinks this, but it's rather that the critical activity of the subject and the disclosive power, the self-showing of the object as being different, they always somehow go hand in hand. Yeah, it's a mutual process of making each other possible, or I don't know exactly what the right words here are. Yeah. Is this something you were asking for? Did I talk about something else? Okay.
Thank you, Fabian.
Okay. Thank you, Professor, for your presentation. I will do my question right now. And you point out that the intervention of the subject does not consist in affirming the historical against the natural, but rather in dissolving the appearance of naturalness. From where, then, can such a dissolution actually operate? What would be the initial point or impulse of thought when the whole situation already appears naturalized? And I'm saying this because I would like to explore further the two expressions that you use in your book. And I'm talking about the release of energy and of restlessness.
Okay. Yeah. No, it's very good that you're asking this question, because it's, I think, related to Veronica's second one, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So Okay, so yeah, good point. I mean, I think if I understand you correctly, we agree that I'm now talking as if we had agreed, but so let's agree on on finding Badiou's concept of decision here and unsatisfying because basically because I don't know who the self of that decision would be, right? So where is the power of decision come from? Yes, can the subject thereby step outside, of that distinction and so on? So in a sense, decision seems to hand over the power of intervention to the subject. It comes out of the subject itself, period. Yeah, and the counter argument was to say that such a subject does not yet exist. Yeah, the subject who can make that decision. Yeah, because the subject is not outside the opposition between nature and history, because that is the distinction we have to draw, but is involved in that distinction because this distinction exists only in such a way that it makes itself disappear. Yeah, and that it disappear. You see, that is the obliteration of the distinction of nature and history. That is what is second nature. Now, second nature is not nature against history, but second nature is the disappearing of the distinction between nature and history. Yeah, so closing, therefore, the space in a certain sense, even of this possible decision. Yeah, so that Badiou is talking about. And I think that is what Adorno believes this is the condition of our society. Yeah, the condition of our society is not that it is historical or natural, but that it makes us forget that distinction or makes that distinction disappear. Things exist as if they were beyond that distinction of nature and history. Yeah. And that is, so therefore the question is, I think I'm just reformulating your question at the point. It's not an answer yet. So the answer comes maybe later if it comes at all. So, and then the question is, how can, and I think Veronica was asking the same, how can the disruption of that veil, of that illusionary situation in which the nature-history distinction has disappeared, and therefore, in a sense, there is not yet a subject, how can that disruption even happen? Yeah, how can that be brought about? Yeah, and I think the least one would have to say is if that condition of illusion were entirely closed, that question could not be answered. Yeah, so your question could not be answered if were living in mere illusion. Yeah, then where would the potential come from? Yeah, so and that means we have to look for those moments in which this illusion is already shattered in itself or broken in itself or fragmented in itself. Yeah. And Adorno thinks that we find these moments, and this is what I tried to say before with reference to the question by Veronica, we find them in moments as imperfect they might be of experience. Yeah, of experience. I mean, there are still moments of experience. Yeah, for instance, the experience of an artwork, the experience in childhood, which is so important for Adorno, but maybe others. Yeah, so that might also be different. So I think we need to assume, and then of course, to make a theory that makes it understandable for us, that this the illusionary dissolution of the distinction between nature and history, or we could say the illusionary totality of society, is not entirely closed. The totality is not total. Yeah. So I think that is a necessary assumption. Yeah, that without which Adorno's project would not get going. Yeah. And then we, of course, is it a mere assumption, or is critical theory, does it have a theory? Does Adorno have a theory about that? And I think he has, yeah, because and the theory consists basically in applying to that illusion precisely the insight which that illusion tries to get rid of, namely the illusion has to be produced. Yeah, the illusionary disruption of the distinction between nature and history, so the distinction between what is there by itself and what has been made, that illusion has itself been made as bringing that distinction between making and givenness, making it disappear. Yeah, so society produces the illusion of the absence of that distinction. And then we can ask about the process of that production, yeah, which maybe one could call ideology or whatever. Yeah, but you see my point? I mean, so if we start to ask about how does the second nature exist, yeah, so if we apply to second nature that question, that second nature wants us to make forget, namely how does it exist, namely not by nature, then the moments of difference, the moments of critique and so on become constitutive for totality, for social totality itself. Yeah, you see the point? Okay.
Thank you. We have time for perhaps one or two more questions. Okay, Esteban.
Esteban, creo que es...
Sí.
Estoy muteado. Voy a hablar español, Christoph. Me gustó mucho tu conferencia. Me alegra mucho volver a verte. Mi pregunta es muy simple, ¿qué papel jugaría en esa diferenciación que haces contra Badiou entre determinación y negación como momentos autónomos que hay que pensarlos juntos en Adorno? ¿Qué papel jugaría aquello que no encuentro que tu conferencia, no digo que no esté, pero no lo encuentro, que es el momento de lo somático en Adorno, el momento de lo añadido en Adorno, para pensar justamente esa conjunción de los momentos en la negación y en la determinación, es decir, aquello que daría la fuerza de la intervención, por lo menos en el ámbito práctico.
No, you're right. I don't know why I didn't didn't refer to this somatic moment. But in a sense, I had that in mind when I think we started this discussion. Now we have had several questions going differently in that direction, but with the second question of Veronica. So in answer to Veronica, I also could have said now with the term you introduced, there is no critical operation of thinking, no operation of critical thinking without a somatic impulse. Yeah, so in that sense, the last word is not critique in Adorno, because there is no critique without answering already to a somatic impulse. So I think that's a very fundamental move he makes, that thinking, which was always understood in the tradition of philosophy as the autonomous act as such, yeah, because thinking is what I do, yeah. So, and everything every thought is a result of my thinking, yeah. So I'm not determined by anything outside, therefore thinking was always seen as the truly free activity. Yeah, this starts with Aristotle, goes on to Hegel. Yeah, so Aristotle says, "Why this is so? Why I'm so happy when I think." Yeah, Aristotle says so because I'm just with myself. Yeah, so and that is something I think, as you rightly indicated, that this is something that Adorno rejects. Yeah, thinking itself is already answering to something that it has received passively before, and what it receives is the somatic impulse. Yeah, so for instance, the impulse that comes from suffering of suffering the way of life we lead in second nature conditions in society. Yeah? So this is an impulse without which nothing would start here. Yeah, but not only negative. I think, and I guess you didn't imply that also. So the somatic impulse does not have to be only negative, that where somatically I experience the deficiency or the terribleness of my condition, but there's also moments of happiness, yeah, which are not conceivable without a moment of the somatic, yeah. So yes, I mean, without the somatic, I think we cannot understand what's going on here, yeah. So how Adorno thinks that the disruption of second nature even can start.
Muchas gracias. And the last one, Joaquín, please.
Sí, mi pregunta es un poco relacionado con eso último y no sé si se desvía mucho del tema, pero tiene que ver con Adorno y no sé, o sea, claro, lo que yo entendía de Adorno es que la sociedad, digamos, ¿no? Total society, ¿no? Lo que habla, nunca se cierra, ¿no? Y claro, mi pregunta es, ¿tú considerarías este como impulso de sufrimiento que genera la experiencia de vivir en esta sociedad, digamos, como una construcción, podríamos decir, antropológica de Adorno, ¿no? Porque, por ejemplo, o sea, de qué es ser un ser humano, digamos, ¿no? Porque, claro, por ejemplo, y ya no sé si me estoy desviando mucho, ¿no? Pero, claro, Honneth interpreta esto como una reapropiación de la idea de Freud de que todo tipo de represión se manifiesta eventualmente como sufrimiento, ¿no? Y hay otros autores, ¿no? Estoy pensando en el libro de Friedenheim que dicen que, claro, que Adorno tiene esta idea de, digamos, de que en nuestra experiencia en el mundo capitalista, nosotros experimentamos como sufrimiento la ruptura de nuestro potencial, ¿no? Digamos, entonces, no sé si tú estarías de acuerdo con adscribir digamos, una especie de antropología que funda, digamos, esta imposibilidad de que lo que dijiste, ¿no? The totality is not total, ¿no? No se cierra. No sé si se entiende mi pregunta o no.
Yeah. I think I hope. I mean, you will tell me if I understood your question. I think I agree and disagree. So I agree with everything what you said, but I'm not sure if I would say that this is an anthropology. I think you said gefunder, yeah. I think which is more fundamental. I think it's rather parallel arguments in different registers, which support each other. So I mean, I think there's on the one hand there's also a very I could even say epistemological or logical argument, yeah, because this is what I tried to say before. I mean, to say that no, the fact that the condition in which we live is a condition of second nature, yeah, I think immediately, as I said before, raises the question, and is this objectively so? Is this a natural fact? Is this a historical fact? Or is it neither nor? Or how is that illusion of second nature, how does it exist? And then if we ask that question, we can say only by us contributing to its production. Yeah. So the illusion of the total closedness of our situation is itself produced by one element which is outside of that situation. Yeah, the subject for which it has that appearance of total closeness. So it always has to be mediated by something which forever will stand in a moment of difference here. So this is, I think, an epistemological argument. So this, I think, not so far from an argument that Badiou makes, by the way, but I think Adorno wants always to say that the question, is the totality of society, is the society a closed totality or not, is somehow the wrong question. Yeah. So, but yes and no. Yeah. We behave as if it were like this, but it's only like this because we behave like that. Yeah. So it's mediated to something which is not part of the closed totality, always already. Yeah. So that is introducing a moment of difference on a very abstract logical level. Yeah. And then I think Adorno wants to say to this corresponds that from that moment of being part and not part of totality, each of us experiences totality in a moment, in a relation of suffering, for instance. Yeah. So, but this argument of suffering is not more fundamental, I think, than the other argument, but they are just correlative. Yeah. There are different ways of articulating the same double relation of being implicated in that totality and being not entirely and never entirely implicated. Yeah, so that can be on the level of experience. You can mark this in this more abstract way I just did, and so on and so on. Yeah, so that, okay. So I just want to say there are different registers, I think, in Adorno's thinking, in which he tries to do justice to that paradoxical, basically, one could say, contradictory logic that comes with the concept of second nature, with the concept of totality as such. Yeah, so totality cannot be closed. Yeah, that is the basic argument, and as I said, that argument can be made in different ways, of which I would not want to decide which is more fundamental, and maybe we do not have to do that. Yeah, we just can say, oh, how nice they cooperate, these arguments. Yeah. They help each other.
Gracias. Gracias.
Okay, thank you very much, Christoph, and thank you all the participants for this terrific discussion. And I hope we'll see again soon.
Okay, I hope so too. Thank you very much for participating. It was very interesting for me. Thank you. Bye-bye.